The gunshot that rang through the morning air sent every person in Los Alamos, New Mexico, scattering like tumbleweeds, except for Hannah Edwards, who kept right on talking about the pretty way the sunlight hit the adobe buildings even as everyone else dove for cover. It was June of 1876, and Hannah had arrived in town just 3 days prior on a dusty stagecoach from Kansas City, carrying 2 worn carpetbags and enough words to fill a dozen novels. The driver had looked relieved when she finally stepped down from the coach, though Hannah had hardly noticed his expression. She had been too busy describing to the other passengers the fascinating cloud formations she had observed during their journey and wondering aloud whether the territorial governor might consider her written proposals for improving the postal system. "Miss, you best get inside," the sheriff called from behind an overturned barrel, his weathered face creased with concern as another shot pinged off the church bell tower. Hannah finally paused, blinking at the chaos around her. "Oh my, is someone shooting?" "I thought perhaps it was fireworks, though I suppose that would be unusual for a Thursday morning. My father always said I had a tendency to get lost in my own thoughts, which I suppose is true, though I prefer to think of it as being thoroughly engaged with the world around me. Do you know, Sheriff, that I once talked my way out of a stage robbery? The bandits were so exhausted by my description of proper agricultural techniques that they simply rode away. Mother always said it was both my greatest gift and my most troublesome quality, though I never quite understood why people found it troublesome. Communication is the cornerstone of civilization. Would you not agree?" The sheriff's mouth hung open slightly as he stared at her, and then he simply shook his head and returned his attention to the gunfight happening at the other end of the street. Hannah took that as her cue to seek shelter, though she continued talking to herself as she hurried into the general store, commenting on the quality of the wooden boardwalk and whether the proprietor might stock the particular brand of writing paper she preferred. The other people huddled inside the store stared at her with a mixture of amazement and exhaustion. "Does she ever stop?" whispered Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, to her husband. "I heard she talked for 4 straight hours on the stage," Mr. Patterson whispered back. Poor driver looked half dead when they arrived. Hannah, oblivious to their commentary, had already engaged the store owner in a detailed discussion about the merits of various coffee brands, and whether he thought the climate in New Mexico might be more conducive to her persistent cough than the dampness of Kansas City had been. It was later that afternoon, after the gunfight had been resolved and the unfortunate outlaw carried off to the undertaker, that Hannah made her way to the boarding house where she had secured a room. Mrs. Campbell, the proprietor, was a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her features. "Miss Edwards," Mrs. Campbell said as Hannah entered, "I have received complaints from the other boarders about the noise from your room." Hannah set down her packages, genuinely confused. "Noise, I assure you I have been most careful with my belongings. I have not dropped anything or moved furniture about." "The talking, Miss Edwards, you talk incessantly. Through the walls, the other guests can hear you going on, even when you are alone in your room." A familiar heat crept up Hannah's neck, the same flush she had felt countless times throughout her 22 years of life. "I apologize, Mrs. Campbell. I have a tendency to think aloud. My father used to say it was like living with a running creek, constant and impossible to dam. I shall endeavor to be quieter." Mrs. Campbell's expression softened slightly, though her voice remained firm. "Please do. Several guests have already requested rooms farther from yours, and I cannot afford to lose paying customers." Hannah nodded, retreating to her small room with its narrow bed and single window overlooking the street. She sat on the edge of the bed, forcing herself to remain silent, but the thoughts piled up in her mind like water behind a beaver dam, pressing and pressing until they burst forth in a whispered monologue about the pattern of the wallpaper, and whether she should write to her sister about her new surroundings. She had come to Los Alamos to teach. The town was growing, and they needed a schoolteacher willing to work for modest wages in a place that was still more wilderness than civilization. Hannah had leaped at the opportunity, eager to escape the increasingly pointed comments from her family and neighbors in Kansas City about her unfortunate habit of excessive talking. Her mother had been particularly keen on Hannah finding a husband, but every potential suitor had eventually excused himself after an evening or two of Hannah's unceasing conversation. "You must learn to let others speak," her mother had said, exasperation clear in every word. "Men do not want wives who talk their ears off. They want quiet, agreeable companions." But Hannah could not seem to help herself. The world was so full of interesting things to observe and discuss, and the silence felt like suffocation. So she had left Kansas City, with her mother's disappointed sighs ringing in her ears and her father's sad, knowing smile imprinted in her memory. The next morning, Hannah set out to explore more of Los Alamos and familiarize herself with the area where she would be teaching. The schoolhouse was a simple structure at the edge of town, one room with wooden benches and a slate board. She was admiring the view of the mountains in the distance, talking to herself about how she might organize the lessons, when she became aware of the vastness of the wilderness beyond the town's borders. Los Alamos was situated in high desert country, with the Jemez Mountains rising to the west and seemingly endless stretches of pinon and juniper-dotted landscape in every direction. The town itself was small, perhaps 200 souls, with the usual assortment of saloons, shops, a church, and scattered residences. But it was the wilderness that called to something in Hannah's spirit, even as it intimidated her. She decided to walk just a bit beyond the town limits, following a well-worn path that led toward a creek she had been told about. The school would need water hauled occasionally, and she wanted to see how far it was. As she walked, she talked, describing to the empty air around her the various plants she passed, the quality of the light, the sound of a hawk crying overhead, her hopes for her students, her concerns about whether she had brought appropriate clothing for the climate, and her wonder at how different everything looked from Kansas City. She was so absorbed in her one-sided conversation that she failed to notice the mountain lion crouched on a rocky outcropping above the path, until it made a low, rumbling growl that finally penetrated her awareness. Hannah froze, her words dying mid-sentence as she looked up and met the yellow eyes of the predator. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and for perhaps the first time in her adult life, she found herself utterly without words. The mountain lion's tail twitched, its muscles bunching as it prepared to spring, and Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she was about to die alone on a path outside a town where she barely knew anyone, and no one would even notice her absence until she failed to appear at the schoolhouse on Monday. Then a figure seemed to materialize from the landscape itself. A man so large and so quiet in his movements that Hannah had not heard his approach at all. He positioned himself between her and the mountain lion, and Hannah's first coherent thought was that she had never seen a human being so thoroughly muscled, so utterly solid and powerful in form. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed broad enough to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered and strong-featured, with a thick beard covering his jaw. He did not shout or make sudden movements. Instead, he simply stood there, meeting the mountain lion's gaze, and made a low sound in his chest that was more growl than anything human. He spread his arms slightly, making himself appear even larger, and took one slow, deliberate step forward. The mountain lion held its position for a long moment, and then, as if recognizing a superior predator, it turned and slipped away into the rocks, vanishing as silently as the man had appeared. Hannah released a breath she had not realized she was holding, and the words came flooding back. The man had turned to face her during this speech, and Hannah found herself looking up into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. They reminded her of storm clouds, or perhaps the color of the mountains at dusk. He regarded her with an expression she could not quite read, something between amusement and curiosity. "Owen Mackenzie," he said, his voice a deep rumble that matched his size. "You should not be out here alone." "Yes, I am beginning to understand that," Hannah said, pressing a hand to her still racing heart. "I was just exploring, you see, wanting to know the area before I begin teaching, and I have always had a tendency to wander. My mother despairs of it. She says I have no sense of proper caution, which I suppose is evidenced by the fact that I nearly became a meal for a mountain lion just now. Are they common in this area? I shall need to warn my students, though I suppose if you had not come along, I would not be in a position to warn anyone of anything, being dead and all. Do you live nearby? How did you happen to be here at precisely the right moment?" My father always said that coincidences were simply God's way of remaining anonymous, though I am not certain I agree with that assessment, as it seems to remove human agency from the equation, and surely our choices matter, do they not? Owen Mackenzie continued to watch her, and slowly, very slowly, something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth beneath his beard. "I have a cabin about 3 miles up in the mountains. I come into town once a month for supplies. I was on my way there when I heard your voice." "Oh, so my talking actually saved my life in a roundabout way, because if I had not been talking you would not have known I was here, though I suppose if I had not been talking I might have heard the mountain lion sooner, so perhaps it is a wash, as they say. 3 miles up in the mountains. That must be quite isolated. Do you not get lonely? I think I would go mad with the silence, though I realize that makes me peculiar, as most people seem to crave silence, whereas I find it unsettling. What do you do up there in your cabin? Are you a trapper? A prospector?" "I have read that there are still men who search for gold in these mountains, though the big rush was in California, was it not? Or perhaps Colorado. Geography was never my strongest subject, though I do enjoy reading about different places. I trap some. Hunt. Mostly I prefer to be away from people." He said this without any particular inflection, simply a statement of fact. "Well, I am terribly sorry to have disturbed your solitude then," Hannah said, though she made no move to leave. "And even more sorry that you had to rescue me. I promise I am not typically so careless. Well, actually, that is not entirely true. I am often quite careless, according to my mother and my sisters and really anyone who has known me for more than a day or two. But I do try to be better. It simply does not always work out as planned." Owen tilted his head slightly, studying her in a way that made Hannah feel like a curious bird he had come across. "You should get back to town. It will be dark in a few hours, and there is more than just mountain lions out here." "Yes, of course. You are absolutely right." Hannah turned back toward the path, then paused. "I truly do thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. You saved my life, and I shall not forget it. Perhaps I shall see you again when you come to town for supplies. I would very much like to repay your kindness somehow, though I am not certain what I could offer that a mountain man would need. I am a fair hand at writing letters. if you have need of such services, and I can read quite well, and I know a great deal about literature and history and arithmetic, though I suppose none of that is particularly useful in the wilderness." "I can read," Owen said, and there was definitely amusement in his eyes now. "But I appreciate the offer." "Oh, I did not mean to imply that you could not. I apologize. That was presumptuous of me. I simply meant, well, I am not certain what I meant, only that I wish to repay the debt I owe you." Hannah felt her cheeks warming. "No debt." Owen gestured toward the path. "Go on now. Stay on the main roads from now on." Hannah nodded and began walking, though she found herself glancing back several times. Owen Mackenzie stood watching her go, a solid, immovable presence against the landscape, and Hannah felt the strangest sensation in her chest, like something shifting and settling into a new position. She talked to herself the entire way back to town, but now her monologue had shifted to include detailed observations about the mountain man who had saved her life. His size, his quiet competence, the way he had faced down the mountain lion with nothing but his presence, the storm cloud color of his eyes, the deep timbre of his voice. She wondered about his life in the mountains, what it must be like to live in such isolation, whether he was lonely or whether he truly preferred solitude, as he had said. By the time she reached the boarding house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Hannah described aloud to herself as she climbed the stairs to her room, earning disapproving looks from Mrs. Campbell and a few other guests. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Hannah tried very hard to remain silent, but the thoughts swirled in her mind like leaves in a dust devil, and eventually she gave up and whispered into the darkness about everything that had happened, about Owen Mackenzie and mountain lions and the strange beauty of New Mexico, and her hopes for her new position as teacher. The school term began the following Monday, and Hannah threw herself into the work with characteristic enthusiasm and volubility. She had 11 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, children of ranchers and shopkeepers and the few miners who still worked claims in the mountains. She talked them through arithmetic problems and geography lessons, through reading assignments and history discussions, and to her delight, the children seemed to respond well to her animated teaching style. "Miss Edwards sure does talk a lot," she heard young Timothy Porter whisper to his sister during a break. "But she makes it interesting," Sarah Porter whispered back. "Better than old Mr. Hendricks. He just made us copy things from books and never explained anything." Hannah felt a warm glow of satisfaction at that. Perhaps here, in this small town on the edge of the wilderness, her tendency to talk would be seen as an asset rather than a flaw. Still, outside of the schoolhouse, she continued to receive pointed comments. Mrs. Campbell reminded her twice more about the noise complaints. The proprietor of the general store began to look harried when she entered his establishment. The women at the church she attended on Sunday smiled tightly and found excuses to end conversations quickly. "You must learn to curb your tongue," Mrs. Patterson told her after church one Sunday, her voice kind but firm. "It is unbecoming in a lady to prattle on so. You will never attract a husband with such habits." Hannah nodded and thanked her for the advice, but inside she felt the familiar ache of being too much, too loud, too present in a world that wanted her to be less. It was late September when she saw Owen Mackenzie again. She was in the general store, discussing with Mr. Henderson the possibility of acquiring more books for the school, when the door opened and Owen ducked through the door frame, his broad shoulders nearly brushing both sides. Hannah's words dried up mid-sentence, which was so unusual that Mr. Henderson actually looked concerned. "You all right, Miss Edwards?" "Yes, quite all right. I apologize. I saw, that is to say, Mr. Mackenzie, hello. I did not expect to see you again so soon, though I suppose a month has passed since we met. Time has a way of slipping by so quickly, especially when one is busy, and I have been very busy with the school. The children are wonderful, so eager to learn. Well, most of them are eager. Timothy Porter would rather be anywhere else. But he is trying, and that is what matters, is it not? Hannah realized she was rambling even more than usual and forced herself to stop. Owen nodded to her, then to Mr. Henderson. Need supplies. Mr. Henderson immediately began gathering items, clearly familiar with Owen's usual order, and Hannah found herself drifting closer, unable to help herself. How have you been? Is your cabin weathering well? I imagine the seasons change quickly in the mountains. We are still quite warm here in town, but I suppose the elevation makes a difference. I have been reading about the local ecology, trying to better understand the environment so I can teach the children about their own surroundings, which I think is terribly important. Do you not agree? There is no point in teaching children about things that have no relevance to their lives. Though of course one must also broaden their horizons, help them understand the wider world. It is a balance, I suppose, between the practical and the aspirational. Owen looked at her, and again she saw that hint of amusement in his eyes. The cabin is fine. I am glad to hear it. I have thought about you often since our encounter. Well, not in an inappropriate way, of course. I simply mean that I wondered how you were faring, and whether you encountered any more mountain lions and what your days must be like up there in the wilderness. It must be so quiet. I cannot imagine such quiet. I think I would talk to the trees and the rocks just to fill the silence. I talk to my horse sometimes, Owen said, and Hannah realized with delight that he was actually engaging in conversation with her. Do you? What is your horse's name? I have always believed that animals are excellent listeners. They do not interrupt or tell you that you talk too much. Not that I am saying you would do such a thing. I have no reason to believe you would. I simply meant that it is a common criticism I receive. My mother despairs of me. She says I drove away every potential suitor in Kansas City with my incessant chatter. Suitors were fools then, Owen said, so quietly that Hannah almost missed it. She blinked, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon. But Owen had turned his attention to the supplies Mr. Henderson was stacking on the counter, and he did not repeat himself. Hannah stood there, her mind racing, trying to determine if he had actually just defended her talking, or if she had simply imagined it in her hopeful desperation to be accepted as she was. Owen paid for his supplies, loaded them into the pack he carried, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at Hannah. Be careful out walking. Autumn brings the bears down from the higher elevations. I will, I promise. Thank you for the warning, and thank you again for saving my life that day. I know I already thanked you, but it bears repeating. Well, not bears as in the animals we were just discussing, but bears as in it is worth saying again. Hannah winced at her own awkwardness, but Owen's expression had softened into something that was unmistakably a smile. Goodbye, Miss Edwards. Goodbye, Mr. Mackenzie. After he left, Hannah stood staring at the door for a long moment before Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. That is probably the most I have ever heard Owen Mackenzie speak to anyone, he said, sounding genuinely surprised. He usually just points at what he needs and grunts. Been coming here for near 5 years now, and I have never heard him string together so many sentences. Hannah turned to look at him, her heart doing something strange and fluttery in her chest. Really, really. Seems he likes you, Miss Edwards, though I cannot say I understand why. No offense, but you do go on something fierce. None taken, Hannah said absently, still thinking about the way Owen had looked at her, The way he had actually responded to her questions, the quiet words about suitors being fools. October brought cooler weather to Los Alamos, and with it, preparations for harvest festivals and the increasing awareness that winter in the mountains would be harsh. Hannah continued to teach, continued to talk, continued to receive both appreciation from her students and exasperation from the other adults in town. She saw Owen again in early November. This time he came to the schoolhouse near the end of the day, carrying a bundle wrapped in canvas. The children had just been dismissed, and Hannah was cleaning the slate board when she heard the heavy footsteps on the wooden floor. She turned and found Owen filling the doorway, and her immediate thought was that he looked even larger indoors, even more powerfully built than she remembered. "Mr. Mackenzie, what a surprise. I did not expect to see you. Is everything all right? Are you hurt? Did something happen?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I brought something for the school." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and set the bundle on her desk, unwrapping it to reveal a stack of books, their leather covers worn but still intact. Hannah gasped, moving closer to examine them. "Books? Oh, these are wonderful. Where did you get them?" "I have been trying to acquire more reading materials for the children, but the budget is so limited, and Mr. Henderson's selection is quite sparse. These are perfect. Look, here is Ivanhoe and Treasure Island, and oh, is this Whitman? The children will be thrilled." "Well, perhaps not with Whitman. He might be a bit advanced for some of them, but the others will be perfect." She looked up at him, tears prickling unexpectedly at her eyes. "Why would you do this?" Owen shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with her emotion. "Had them in the cabin." "Not using them. Heard you telling Henderson you needed books. You heard me. When, last time I was in town, you were talking to Henderson about it. I was outside." Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she touched the books. "This is incredibly kind. I do not know what to say." "Well, that is not true. I always know what to say. I have an endless supply of words, but I am not certain I have the right words to express how much this means. The children will have so many more options now for reading, and reading is so important. It opens up entire worlds, allows us to experience lives and places we might never otherwise know, and these books specifically are perfect for that age range. I am simply amazed that you would think to do this." "You love teaching," Owen said. It was not a question. "I do. I love it very much. It is the first thing I have done that feels right, that feels like I am in the place I am meant to be. Even if people here think I talk too much, just as they did in Kansas City, at least the children seem to benefit from it." She smiled up at him. "Do you love living in the mountains?" "Yes." "What do you love about it?" Owen was quiet for a moment, and Hannah wondered if she had overstepped, asked something too personal. But then he said, "The quiet, the simplicity. Everything makes sense up there. You hunt, you trap, you survive. No complicated social rules or expectations." "That does sound peaceful," Hannah said. "Though I think I would miss people too much. Not that people are not complicated, they absolutely are, and sometimes I wish they were simpler, but I also find them endlessly fascinating. Every person is a story, do you not think? A whole collection of experiences and thoughts and feelings that have shaped who they are. I love hearing those stories, learning about people, though I have been told I talk far more than I listen, which is probably true if I am being honest with myself." "I like hearing you talk," Owen said, and Hannah's breath caught. "You do?" "Yes." He met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her feel warm all over. "Your voice is my favorite sound to hear." Hannah stared at him, completely speechless for the second time in her life, both times because of this man. "Mr. Mackenzie, that is perhaps the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. It is the truth." They stood there in the schoolhouse, the late afternoon light slanting through the windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams, and something passed between them that felt significant and profound, and just a little bit frightening in its intensity. "Would you, that is, I know you prefer solitude, but would you perhaps like to stay for supper?" Hannah asked. "I realize I am not much of a cook. The boarding house provides meals, but I could ask Mrs. Campbell if you might join us, or we could go to the hotel restaurant, my treat, as a thank you for the books." "I should get back before dark," Owen said, but he sounded reluctant. "Of course, yes, the mountains at night would be dangerous to travel. Another time, perhaps." "When you next come to town, I would like that." Hannah smiled, and she knew it was probably too wide, too enthusiastic, but she could not help it. "I would like it too, very much." Owen nodded, then turned to leave. At the door he paused. "Hannah." It was the first time he had used her given name, and she loved the sound of it in his deep voice. "Yes. Do not let them make you quiet. The world needs your voice." Then he was gone, ducking out the door and striding away into the gathering dusk, leaving Hannah standing in the schoolhouse with tears running down her cheeks and a feeling in her heart that she was terrified to name. That night, despite Mrs. Campbell's disapproving looks and the other boarders' complaints, Hannah talked aloud in her room, processing everything that had happened, everything Owen had said, the way he had looked at her, the gift of the books, his words about her voice being his favorite sound. She talked until her voice grew hoarse, and then she lay in the darkness, hugging the knowledge of his kindness to herself like a precious secret. The weeks that followed were both wonderful and difficult. Hannah threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, using the books Owen had brought to engage her students in discussions and reading assignments. They devoured the adventure stories, and even some of the older boys who had been reluctant readers became invested in the tales of pirates and knights and high seas adventure. But outside the schoolhouse, the complaints about her continued. Mrs. Campbell threatened to evict her if she could not learn to be quieter in her room. The ladies at church avoided sitting near her. Even some of the parents of her students, while appreciating her teaching abilities, made pointed comments about her unladylike verbosity. "My daughter is learning so much," Mrs. Porter told her one day after school, "but I do worry that she is also picking up some of your, shall we say, more excessive habits. She has been talking much more at home, and her father finds it tiresome." Hannah bit back the retort that perhaps Mr. Porter should try actually listening to his daughter instead of finding her tiresome, and simply nodded. "I shall try to set a better example." But how could she set an example of something she could not do herself? How could she teach children to be quiet and restrained when everything in her nature rebelled against such constraints? She found herself thinking constantly about Owen Mackenzie, about his isolated cabin in the mountains, about the way he had said her voice was his favorite sound to hear. It seemed impossible that someone could genuinely appreciate the very thing about her that everyone else found intolerable. December brought snow to the mountains and cold winds to Los Alamos. Hannah worried about Owen, alone in his cabin, and found herself watching the road for any sign of his tall figure whenever she was in town. The school remained open despite the cold, though attendance became sporadic as storms rolled through, and families kept their children home to help with winter chores. It was a week before Christmas when Owen appeared again, this time walking directly to the boarding house and asking Mrs. Campbell if he might speak with Miss Edwards. Mrs. Campbell, flustered by the appearance of the intimidating mountain man at her door, sent one of the other boarders to fetch Hannah from her room. Hannah rushed down the stairs, her heart pounding. "Owen, is something wrong?" He stood in the entryway, snowflakes melting in his dark hair, looking even larger in his heavy winter coat. "No, I came to ask if you would like to come to the cabin for Christmas." Hannah blinked. "To your cabin, in the mountains?" "Yes, I know you will have some days off from teaching. I thought you might like to see it, if you want." Mrs. Campbell made a scandalized sound. "That would be highly improper, Mr. Mackenzie. Miss Edwards cannot simply go off into the mountains alone with a man." Owen's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Hannah said, "I am 22 years old, Mrs. Campbell, and I make my own decisions. If I choose to accept Mr. Mackenzie's invitation, that is my affair." "Then you will no longer be welcome in this boarding house," Mrs. Campbell said sharply. "I maintain certain standards." Hannah felt a moment of panic at the thought of losing her lodging, but then she looked at Owen, at the hope and uncertainty in his gray eyes, and she knew what her answer would be. "I understand. I shall collect my things." "Hannah, you do not have to," Owen said quickly. "I did not mean to cause problems." "You are not causing problems. I am choosing this. I want to see your cabin. I want to spend Christmas with you. If that means finding new lodging when I return, so be it." She smiled at him. "Give me half an hour to pack." She rushed back upstairs, her mind racing as she gathered her belongings into her 2 carpetbags. She could hear Mrs. Campbell below, loudly disapproving to anyone who would listen about young women these days and their complete lack of moral fiber. But Hannah found she did not care. For once in her life, she was acting purely on what she wanted, not on what others expected of her. When she came back downstairs, Owen took her bags without a word and led her outside to where a horse waited, saddled and patient in the cold. He secured her bags, then lifted her onto the saddle with such ease that she felt weightless. He swung up behind her, and Hannah found herself pressed back against his broad chest, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. "Are you warm enough?" he asked, his voice rumbling against her back. "Yes, quite warm, actually. This is very warm. I mean, your coat is warm and the position is warm, and oh dear, I am rambling again. But yes, I am fine, quite comfortable, thank you." She felt more than heard his quiet chuckle as he urged the horse forward into the falling snow. The ride to Owen's cabin took several hours, climbing steadily into the mountains along paths that Hannah could barely distinguish. She talked for much of the journey, telling him about her students, about the books he had brought and how much the children loved them, about her concerns regarding Mrs. Campbell's disapproval, and what she would do about lodging when she returned to town. "You could stay at the cabin," Owen said at one point. Hannah twisted to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean you could live there. If you want, the ride to town is long but manageable. Plenty of people commute farther for work. But it is your cabin, your private space." "You said you prefer solitude." "I prefer your company," he said simply. Hannah's heart felt too large for her chest. "Owen, I talk constantly. You would hear my voice all the time. Every morning, every evening, whenever I am there. It would drive you mad, just as it drives everyone else mad." "No," he said firmly. "It would not. I have lived in silence for 5 years, Hannah. Chosen silence because I found the noise of towns and people exhausting and meaningless. But your voice is different. You notice things, you think about things. You are curious and kind and endlessly interested in the world. When you talk, it is like watching someone paint, seeing all the colors and details they add until something beautiful emerges. I could listen to you forever and never tire of it." Hannah felt tears welling up, freezing on her cold cheeks. "No one has ever described my talking as beautiful before. Then everyone else is a fool." They rode in silence for a while after that, and Hannah realized that for once she did not feel the need to fill the quiet with words. Owen's presence was enough, solid and warm and accepting at her back. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was larger than Hannah had expected, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and several windows that promised good light. Owen helped her down from the horse, then led the animal to a small stable built against the side of the cabin. Another horse, a gray mare, nickered a greeting from inside. "That is Sage," Owen said. "My other horse. She is beautiful. I have never been much of a rider, to be honest." "Well, I suppose that is obvious given how awkwardly I sat the saddle earlier, clinging to the pommel like my life depended on it. Do you ride often? I suppose you must, given how far you are from town. How do you manage in winter when the snow is deep? I imagine it becomes quite difficult." "Do you get snowed in? That must be frightening, to be completely cut off from civilization." Owen smiled as he unsaddled the horse. "I get snowed in sometimes. It is peaceful. I have supplies, plenty of wood for the fire, books to read. The quiet is good. But now you will have me here chattering away, so it will not be quiet at all. Are you certain about this, Owen? I mean truly certain. Because once I settle in and start talking, I may never stop, and you will be trapped here with me and my endless words, and you might regret the entire thing." Hannah followed him into the cabin, still talking, but stopped short when she saw the interior. It was warm and inviting, with a large fireplace taking up most of one wall, a sturdy table and chairs, a bed in one corner with a quilt that looked handmade, shelves full of books, and windows that framed views of the snow-covered mountains. Everything was clean and well-maintained, and Hannah felt an immediate sense of coming home. "This is wonderful," she breathed. "Absolutely wonderful. The view alone is worth the long ride, and the fireplace is beautiful, and you have so many books. I did not realize. I suppose I should have guessed given that you had books to donate to the school, but this is quite a collection. Have you read all of them? I suppose you must have, given how much time you spend here. What are your favorites? I love discussing books with people, hearing what resonates with them, what they think about various characters and themes." Owen set her bags down and lit a lamp, warm light flooding the cabin. "I will show you my favorites, but first you should warm up by the fire. I will make tea." Hannah moved to the fireplace, holding her hands out to the warmth. She watched Owen move around the cabin with easy familiarity, building up the fire, filling a kettle with water from a barrel, setting mugs on the table. His movements were efficient and capable, and Hannah found herself mesmerized by the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he worked. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 5 years. Built the cabin myself the first year." "By yourself? That is incredibly impressive. I can barely hang a picture straight, and you built an entire cabin. What made you decide to live in the mountains? Were you escaping something? Or just seeking something? I suppose those are sometimes the same thing, are they not? Running from and running toward are two sides of the same coin." Owen was quiet for a moment, measuring tea leaves into a pot. "I was in the war. Afterward, I could not stand being around people. All the noise, all the talking, all the expectations. Everyone wanted to discuss what happened, or they wanted to pretend nothing happened, and neither option felt right, so I came here." "Which side did you fight for?" Hannah asked gently. "The Union. I believed in the cause, still do. But that does not make the things I saw any easier to carry." Hannah moved to stand near him. "I cannot imagine what that must have been like. War is such an abstract concept when you read about it in books or newspapers, but to actually live through it, to see and do things that no person should have to, that must change you fundamentally. No wonder you sought silence afterward. The quiet must have been healing." "It was, until I met you." Owen looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "Now the quiet feels empty. I find myself listening for your voice even when you are not there." "Owen," Hannah whispered, and then she could not say anything else because he had closed the distance between them and cupped her face gently in his large, calloused hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," Hannah breathed. "Please, yes." His kiss was gentle despite his size, careful and sweet, and Hannah felt something inside her click into place like a key turning in a lock. She wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and he deepened the kiss, one arm wrapping around her waist to pull her against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hannah said, "That was my first kiss." Owen looked surprised. "Truly, truly. Most men do not stick around long enough after I start talking. But you are still here. You are kissing me. You are telling me my voice is beautiful. I feel like I must be dreaming, not dreaming." Owen rested his forehead against hers. "This is real. You are real. The way I feel about you is real." "How do you feel about me?" Hannah asked, needing to hear the words. "I love you," Owen said, simple and direct. "I think I have loved you since the day I saw you talking your way through nearly being eaten by a mountain lion, not even realizing you were in danger because you were so caught up in describing the scenery." Hannah laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too." Which is absurd because we have spent so little time together. And I hardly know anything about you really, though I suppose I know the important things, like the fact that you are kind and brave and you see value in something everyone else sees as a flaw. And you saved my life, and you brought books to my students, and you invited me here for Christmas, and you are a good man, Owen Mackenzie, such a good man. He kissed her again, and then the kettle began to whistle and they broke apart laughing. Owen made the tea while Hannah explored the cabin, examining his books, admiring the craftsmanship of the furniture, talking constantly about everything she saw and thought and felt. And Owen listened to every word, that small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, his eyes following her movements with an expression of complete contentment. That night, they sat by the fire drinking tea and talking, though now Owen participated more in the conversation, telling her about his life before the war, about growing up on a farm in Ohio, about his parents who had died when he was young, about the friends he had lost in battle. Hannah told him about her childhood in Kansas City, about her sisters who were all quiet and proper, and everything she was not, about her father who had loved her despite her differences, and her mother who had despaired of ever getting her married off. "I am sorry about your father," Owen said when she mentioned his death 2 years prior. "Thank you. He would have liked you, I think. He always said I needed someone strong enough to stand steady while I swirled around like a tornado. That is you, Owen. You are steady and strong, and somehow you make me feel like it is all right to be exactly who I am. It is more than all right. It is perfect." They talked until the fire burned low and the moon rose high outside the windows. Owen showed Hannah where she could sleep, offering her his bed while he took blankets to sleep by the fire, and though Hannah protested that she could not take his bed, he insisted. "You are my guest," he said firmly. "And more than my guest. You are the woman I love. You will sleep in the bed." Hannah lay under the handmade quilt, staring at the log ceiling, and whispered into the darkness all the things she felt, all her hopes and fears and dreams. And from his place by the fire, Owen whispered back, "Sleep now, Hannah. I am here. You are safe." She slept better than she had in months. Christmas in the mountains was unlike anything Hannah had experienced. Owen took her on walks through the snow-covered forest, pointing out animal tracks and teaching her to move quietly through the wilderness. Hannah tried to be quiet, she truly did, but the beauty of everything demanded to be commented on, and Owen never once asked her to stop talking. They cooked together, simple food but delicious, and Hannah learned that Owen was a far better cook than she was, which he attributed to necessity and practice. They read aloud to each other from his collection of books, taking turns with passages from Dickens and Hawthorne and Longfellow. They sat by the fire in the evenings, and Hannah would talk through her thoughts about the stories while Owen listened and occasionally offered his own insights. On Christmas Eve, Owen gave her a gift he had carved himself, a beautiful wooden box with her initials on the lid. "For your letters and papers," he explained. "I noticed you always have scraps of writing scattered around." Hannah held the box, overcome with emotion. "Owen, this is exquisite. The detail work must have taken hours. When did you make this?" "Been working on it since November. Since I decided I wanted to ask you here for Christmas." "You planned this that far in advance." "I wanted it to be right. Wanted to have something to give you." Hannah set the box down carefully and threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you. It is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received." She gave him her own gift, a scarf she had been secretly knitting in her room at the boarding house, deep blue wool that matched his eyes in certain lights. Owen wrapped it around his neck immediately and declared he would wear it always. That night, as they sat by the fire with snow falling softly outside, Owen said, "Move here, permanently. Marry me." Hannah looked at him, her heart in her throat. "Are you certain?" "Owen, marriage is forever. You would be committing to listening to me talk for the rest of your life." "I know. That is what I want. You, here with me, filling this cabin with your voice and your presence and your light. I want to wake up to you talking yourself through making breakfast and fall asleep to you whispering your thoughts into the darkness. I want to hear your observations about the weather and your theories about the students and your opinions on everything we read. I want your voice to be the last thing I hear before I die, hopefully many, many years from now." "Yes," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes how much I love you. Do not be frightened. I will always be here. I will always listen. I will always love you exactly as you are." They married in early January in a simple ceremony at the church in Los Alamos. The townspeople attended, many looking surprised that the reclusive mountain man was marrying the overly talkative schoolteacher, but no one could deny the obvious love between them. Owen stood tall and proud beside Hannah, his hand wrapped around hers, and when the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, his expression dared anyone to speak. No one did. Hannah continued teaching through the spring, making the long ride from the cabin to town several days a week. The children thrived under her instruction, and even the parents who had complained about her talkativeness had to admit that their children were learning more than they ever had before. In the evenings, Hannah would return to the cabin and talk Owen through her entire day, telling him about everything the students had said and done, every small triumph and challenge. And Owen would listen, occasionally asking questions, always engaged, always interested. "Do you never tire of hearing about it all?" Hannah asked him one night in late spring as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Never," Owen said. "I love hearing about your day. I love knowing what you think and feel. Your voice is home to me now, Hannah. The cabin felt like shelter before you came, but now it feels like home because you are here." Hannah leaned against his shoulder, for once content to simply sit in comfortable silence, though it did not last long. Soon, she was pointing out the colors in the clouds and wondering aloud whether they meant rain was coming and speculating about what they might plant in a garden now that the weather was warm enough. Summer brought long, golden days, and the news that Hannah was pregnant. She talked to her growing belly constantly, telling the baby about everything around them, describing the mountains and the animals and the father he or she would have. Owen would press his hand to her stomach and feel the baby kick, a look of wonder on his face. "He kicks when you talk," Owen observed. "How do you know it is a he?" just a feeling. Either way, I will love them, but I think we have a son growing there." Owen was right. In late February of 1877, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Oliver. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's inability to stay quiet for long, crying lustily from the moment he entered the world. "He has your voice," Owen said, cradling the baby with surprising gentleness for such a large man. "Poor child," Hannah said, exhausted but happy. "Doomed to talk too much just like his mother." Not doomed, blessed, just like his mother. Hannah continued teaching through the spring after Oliver's birth, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse where he slept in a basket while she taught. The students were enchanted with the baby, and the older girls would help care for him during breaks. By summer, Hannah was pregnant again, and this time she decided to take a break from teaching to focus on their growing family. She gave birth to a daughter in early 1878, a girl they named Hope. Hope was quieter than her brother, more likely to observe than vocalize, and Hannah worried briefly that perhaps she would be disappointed by her overly talkative mother. But Owen assured her, "Hope will love you just as you are, just as we all do, just as any other children we have will. You are teaching them that it is all right to be themselves, to take up space, to have thoughts and feelings and express them. That is a gift, Hannah." Over the years, their family grew to include 2 more children, another boy named Jasper and a girl named Rose. The cabin was expanded to accommodate them all, with Owen building additional rooms with the same care and skill he had built the original structure. Hannah never returned to teaching in town, but she taught her children at home, filling their days with lessons and stories and endless conversations. The children grew up knowing that their mother's voice was the soundtrack of their lives, and they never questioned it or found it strange. It was simply how things were, and they loved her for it. Owen trapped and hunted and made occasional trips to town for supplies, but he always hurried back to the cabin, eager to return to the sound of Hannah's voice and the chaos of their lively household. He was a patient father, strong and protective, teaching the children to track animals and chop wood and read the weather in the clouds. But it was Hannah who taught them to wonder, to question, to see the beauty and interest in everything around them. She taught them that words were powerful, that communication mattered, that their voices and thoughts and feelings deserved to be heard. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen and Hannah sat on the porch of their cabin, now white-haired and weathered but no less in love than they had been as young newlyweds. The children were grown now, Oliver married and living in town with his own family, Hope teaching in a school 2 territories over, Jasper working as a guide for hunters and explorers in the mountains, and Rose studying to be a doctor in Denver. "Can you believe it has been 20 years?" Hannah asked, holding Owen's hand. 20 years since you married the woman who talks too much. 20 years since I married the woman whose voice is my favorite sound," Owen corrected. "And I would do it again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every word, every conversation, all of it. Even when I talked for 3 hours straight about whether we should plant beans or squash in the garden, especially then." Hannah laughed, and the sound echoed across the mountains they both loved. "I love you, Owen Mackenzie. Thank you for letting me be myself. For making me feel like who I am is enough. More than enough. Perfect." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set behind the peaks, and then Hannah began to talk, telling him about a letter she had received from Hope, about something interesting Rose had written about her studies, about her thoughts on the changing seasons and the new family that had moved to Los Alamos, and whether they should invite them for dinner. And Owen listened to every word, his hand wrapped around hers, his expression peaceful and content. thinking as he had thought every day for the past 20 years that he was the luckiest man alive to have found a woman whose voice filled all the empty spaces in his soul. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren who would visit the cabin and listen with wide eyes as their grandmother told them stories about everything under the sun. Hannah's voice never quieted, never diminished, never became less than it had always been. And Owen's love never wavered, never faded, never became anything less than absolute. They grew old together in the mountains, surrounded by the beauty of the wilderness and the love of their family. And every night when they lay down to sleep, Hannah would whisper her thoughts into the darkness, and Owen would whisper back that her voice was still his favorite sound to hear, and it would always be so, until his last breath and beyond. When Owen died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, with Hannah holding his hand and talking softly about all the years they had shared and how much she loved him, his last words were, "Keep talking, Hannah. I will always be listening." And Hannah did. She lived another 5 years after Owen's death, staying in the cabin they had built together, still talking to him as if he were there, still filling the space with her voice. Their children and grandchildren visited often, and Hannah would talk to them about their lives and their choices and their dreams, always encouraging, always interested, always herself. When she finally joined Owen, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 89, her grandchildren found a letter she had written to be read after her death. In it, she wrote about how everyone in her life had tried to make her quiet, to make her less, to make her fit into a mold that was never designed for her. Everyone except one man, one strong, steady mountain man who had heard her voice and called it beautiful. The letter ended with these words, "If I have learned anything in my long life, it is this: do not let the world make you smaller. Do not let them silence your voice. Somewhere, there is someone who will hear you and love you exactly as you are." For me, that someone was Owen. He taught me that my voice mattered, that I mattered, and that gift changed everything. Find your Owen, be your own Hannah, and never, ever stop talking about the things that matter to you. The letter was passed down through the generations, along with the wooden box Owen had carved for Hannah that first Christmas, and the story of the schoolteacher who talked too much, and the mountain man who said her voice was his favorite sound to hear, became a family legend, a testament to the power of acceptance and love. And in the mountains outside Los Alamos, in the cabin Owen had built, and the family he and Hannah had created, their love story lived on. A reminder that sometimes the things the world sees as flaws are actually the most beautiful parts of who we are, if only we can find someone who sees clearly enough to recognize it. The cabin still stands today, maintained by the descendants of Hannah and Owen, a place where family gathers and stories are told and voices are always welcomed, no matter how much they talk. Because in that place, words are sacred and love is eternal, and the memory of a mountain man and his talkative wife reminds everyone who enters that true love means being seen, being heard, and being cherished exactly as you are. Hannah Edwards and Owen Mackenzie lived well, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that had nothing to do with silence and everything to do with the courage to speak, the grace to listen, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the noise we make is the most beautiful music of all.